My name is Alexandra Papaikonomou, and on behalf of Partners in Project Green, I would like to welcome you to our monthly series of green technology webinars. For those of you who might not know, Partners in Project Green, developed in partnership with Toronto and Region Conservation and the Greater Toronto Airports Authority, is a growing community of businesses working together to green their bottom line by creating an internationally recognized eco-business zone around Toronto Pearson. We offer many resources to help companies along their journey to sustainability. For more information on our programs, training, events, and much more, visit our website at partnersinprojectgreen.com. So for today's webinar, we're fortunate to have Craig Panesi calling in from Toronto. Mr. Panesi is Senior Director, Corporate Development for Enbala Power Networks, focusing on partner strategies and new markets. He has 15 years experience working in business development and strategic consulting for the energy, clean tech, and IT industry. Mr. Panesi has a profound understanding of the power system and how loads can benefit by playing a greater role in its management. Previous roles include Vice President of Sales at Zero Footprint and Director of Sales and Business Development at Genthion Technologies. Mr. Panesi has an MBA from Queen's University. So if I could just welcome Greg to take on the presentation, that'd be great.
Great, thanks Alexandra, and thanks also to Partners in Project Green for allowing Enbala to present on who we are and our technology. Can everyone hear me okay? Alexandra? So,
yes, I can hear you fine. Sorry, Greg.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. So what we're going to discuss today is relatively a new program, the Enbala Grid Balance program, and we're going to talk to you about how loads could take advantage of their inherent flexibility to help provide service to the power system. What I'd like to say first is that most people are aware of what demand response is and curtailment, et cetera. And I wanted to set the platform is that is not where we're focused in on. However, that's where many people will draw reference to. So I want to disclose that up front, and hopefully then by the end of the presentation, you have various questions and maybe how this relates. So what Enbala is doing is paying large industrial loads and commercial electricity users to help balance the electricity grid. And what we're really doing is harvesting what we call this inherent flexibility that exists in your large process loads without impacting the operations. And this provides multiple benefits to grid operators and utilities. So to say this another way, what we're really doing is monetizing the way in which your processes work today in order to provide this balance back to the grid. And again, being able to provide this balance back to the grid provides many benefits, which I'll go into later in the presentation. So the power system needs flexibility, and we need it in many different forms. Obviously, just provide electricity, and this is really, electrons flowing on wires through capacity, and I'm pretty sure most organizations are familiar with the various capacity programs that exist out there, and this is really just to be able to meet your peak requirement. And, in Ontario, this is usually through forms of demand response or global adjustment and even time of use. So, a lot of these programs generally happen in the summer time frame, whether it be trying to meet those 5 days in which they are the hottest days of the year, in which you have to watch how much load your organization is using, or simply participating in demand response events, in which you may be called 8 to 10 times within the summer and asked to maybe curtail your load or shut down part of your facility for 4 hours in order to and receive an additional revenue stream from that. Where Enbala's focus is on strictly flexibility and this ability to continually match supply and demand. And many people aren't aware of this, but there's this constant imbalance in which supply does not equal demand. And usually the way you think about it is, when we all get up in the morning, this is at a very small scale, everyone will turn on their coffee makers, or we'll all go home and then turn on our ovens. But it's this aggregated influx of the use of power that really creates this imbalance. And so our role or job at Enbala is to ensure that this the system is balanced at all times. And I'm going to talk to you about how we do that. one of the big challenges on the grid is the fact that there are new tools needed. Traditionally, we were encouraged to use as much electricity as we wanted. Basically, when we wanted to use more electricity, the grid would look at what they needed and they would ramp up generators accordingly. And, coal facilities were fantastic resources to do that because they had that flexibility to move up and down in order to provide what the grid needed. But obviously, everyone's aware we're trying to mitigate the use of coal. And so that's one challenge. We're running out of that flexibility. And when you look at today and what's happening into the future, you're aware that the power mix is changing. So there's this need for new generation, and we're relying on the likes of solar and wind, which are great forms of resources. However, the big issue with it is we're not always sure when and where it's coming from, and that is really due to when you're using wind, the sun wind gusts could die, or there could be a cloud covering of the sun. So, the real issue is, the lack of flexibility due to the various historical resources that we relied on, as well as relying on new forms of generation that are much more intermittent. It's creating this perfect storm, if you will. And as a result, we're really going to have to start to rely on demand in the future in order to manage supply. And so it's the demand side loads that are really going to have to change the way they behave in order to help meet the real time needs of the power system. This is the general landscape of the various solutions that the grid or the power system is looking for. Just to set it up here, the green bubbles, the light green bubbles is where Enbala is focused, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that. So we understand the horizontal and vertical axis. The vertical axis is the speed of response, and the horizontal is the number of requests you would receive. And so the big circle, grayed out circle in the bottom left-hand corner is what most organizations are familiar with. Again, that idea of curtailment or traditional demand response. And it can be as simple as someone calling you up a day beforehand and asking you, can you shut down in 2 days from now for 4 hours? We're going to have a demand response event. And, as I said earlier, you could have as many as 8 demand response events to 12 within a summer period. Where we're focused is the top right-hand corner under grid balance, and that's the first program Enbala is in market with, and I'll talk to you the various markets we're involved in. But that is where we're focused, and it's almost looking like we're doing the hardest one first. Obviously, there's a significant amount of speed to response as well as the number of requests you would receive, and I'll talk to you about what that looks like. But what we always like to say is that, if you can do grid balance, you're going to be able to do and participate in many of these other programs. So although we're talking to you today about grid balance, there are going to be many other programs in which you would be able to participate in through the Enbala platform that you could be receiving additional revenue streams. And those would include things like renewable integration and generator efficiency. And these are programs we're working on with the grids across North America to bring to market. So again, today we're here to talk to you about grid balance, but it's not that it's the only program you'll be able to participate in the future. So I've talked to you a little bit about the fact that the grid needs flexibility, and I guess the question is, where do you get this flexibility from? And what Enbala does is captures the storage that already exists in order to provide this balance back to the grid. And so we know that the storage exists in the power system, we know that it exists in the various processes within various organizations, and it's this ability to connect these processes that have the storage to the grid, and that's what Enbala does. So you see an example, 4 different examples there: water distribution facilities, to commercial building or commercial HVAC, air conditioning loads, to refrigerated warehousing, to wastewater treatment plants. Pretty much any large industrial load has this inherent flexibility that they can use through our platform to provide this bounce back to the grid. And I'm going to talk to you, what that involves. But, just for example, if you were to use an HVAC load or cold storage, what we're really doing is looking at temperature. So if your commercial building is set to, let's say, 70 degrees, I mean, although it's set to 70 degrees, you may have a temperature band going from 68 to 72. And it's this ability to be able to move up to 72 or down to 68 that we are able to, what is called flexibility, and that's what we're able to monetize. So it's, again, although you're holding to a set point of 70, you really have this range, this 4-degree range, and it's that 4-degree range that provides this flexibility that we can help monetize to provide back to the grid. How we do this is we have a relationship with the ISOs across North America, various different ones. So the ISO, the independent system operator, also known as the grid operator, because we have these relationships, they send us a signal every 4 seconds of what their grid requires. So we know every 4 seconds what the imbalance is and what we need to provide back to the grid. And so this signal goes through what we call the Enbala power network, which is a set of algorithms that basically figures out what we need to do in order to provide this balance. And this network, the Enbala power network is in constant communication with various assets within your organization. So meaning that, we'll work with fans to chillers, to compressors, to pumps. And so what's happening is we are sending a request to these facilities to see if they have the ability to provide this flexibility back to the grid. And so to use that HVAC, that air conditioning load as an example, if we get a signal and we know that a commercial building has the ability to participate, we will send a request saying to the building automation system, do you have the ability to move up by 2 degrees or move down by 2 degrees? And it's the building automation system that makes that decision whether or not it can. And if it does, then it's providing that balance back to the grid. So a couple of things you need to think about here is the fact that we are not controlling your facilities from the outside. Again, we are just a connection into a building automation system in which your building automation system is making all the decisions, as well as that there is no manual intervention. This is completely automated, so meaning that there's no text messaging or a phone call. It's really a signal in which, again, your building automation system decides whether or not can participate. The other thing I'd like to add is the fact that there are no penalties if you cannot participate. So unlike other programs like demand response, you're committed to shed load. But because our program's 8,760 hours, you participate when you're able to participate. And I like to say that, we're really, the way in which you use your assets today is the way in which you would use them tomorrow. And again, what we're really only doing is time shifting. So, for example, if your air condition goes on 4 times an hour for 5 minutes, the chilling system, that will the same duty will happen. It will only go on 4 times for 5 minutes. We just may be time shifting when that happens within that hour. And so for those people that are thinking, what happens if it's a hot summer day and I'm almost at my peak load, would Enbala ask me to use more power? And the answer is no. We're aware that you might be hitting that peak, so we would never send you a request. So in a nutshell, you're using the same amount of electricity, the same cost, and you're doing the same amount of duty. So again, none of your operational processes should be affected by participating in our program. So what are the benefits? The number one benefit for you as a customer or a supplier of the flexibility, if you will, is the fact that you're creating an additional revenue stream. If you're doing participating in your global adjustment program, if you're doing demand response and time of use, you would continue doing all those programs. The beauty of our program is the fact that it's a complement, and it sits right on top of all the other initiatives you're participating in. So again, just think of this as another additional revenue stream where you can do demand response, but you can do Enbala when you're not doing demand response and all the other initiatives. We're reducing costs of the operational maintenance in the system, which is obviously an overall benefit to your electricity bill. We're reducing the GHG emissions, which I will address, but for large companies that obviously have CSR reporting or they're just wanting to ensure they're doing the benefit to the environmental side of things, we help meet that requirement. We're obviously helping generators operate more efficiently, and at the end of the day, we're helping satisfy you as an electricity consumer by participating. Obviously, we're reducing your electricity bill by giving you a quarterly revenue check, but not only that, you're participating in something good. The electricity system is changing for the better and improving, and obviously we see a lot of large organizations that are big electricity users wanting to participate in that change. From an environmental side, this was a quick study done by the Bloom Consulting Group. If you looked at 100 megawatts of grid balance being provided into the system, what we're able to do is reduce about 550,000 tons of greenhouse gas, and that also translates into 3,800 tons of emissions reduced, and this is overall $3 million saved in health impact. So there's tremendous environmental and health benefits for what Enbala and what grid balance is able to do through the use of demand-side loads, as opposed to using coal and natural gas generators to provide this. So, from a client perspective, what we look for, obviously, we're looking for organizations that are innovative, progressive, and visionary, to believe into these type programs. If you don't participate in a lot of electricity programs, you don't look at your bills or do time of use, participating in a program like this might be difficult to generate interest in. But we feel most large industrial, large commercial loads are already engaged in these type programs, especially things like demand response. So we see a lot of organizations interested in seeing how they can participate. The general profile of what we're looking for is a 1,500 kilowatt peak demand. That's the minimum we would start at. We are looking for some level of automation. So if you have a building automation or system or a SCADA system, that's helpful usually. And you have some ability to control your load through automations. And we look for flexibility, and I'll talk to you how we look for that. But there has to be flexibility in the systems that you're running. We also look for organizations that are currently involved in energy reduction initiatives, because they're already set up for programs like these and understand what it takes. So that's usually helpful. And I know we're talking to the right group here. I believe most are Ontario-based. However, they may have other affiliate facilities in North America, and we are active in Pennsylvania, Jersey, Maryland, which is based of 13 states in the U.S. as well. So, if this is something you think would lend itself nicely to one of your sister facilities, then that's something we could also look at as well. In terms of equipment and verticals we focus in on, these are the main verticals that we feel are that provide the most benefit in terms of flexibility to the power system. So whether it be refrigerated warehousing to municipal water, the MUSH sector is fantastic, like hospitals, universities, schools, but also petrochemical, automotive, and industrial gas. We have done a lot of work in these areas, done a lot of studies and analysis, and based on the processes or the equipment to target that you see up there, we have determined and believe and are confident that there is a significant amount of flexibility within these large process loads that we can monetize in order to provide this service back to the grid. And so again, if you're trying to figure out, am I a candidate for this, what we really looking for, again, is the 1.5 megawatt minimum peak demand, some automation, and then obviously this various equipment that I've listed on the slide right now. What I'd like to give you is a demonstration, because I think this will really kind of sum up how this works and why we're doing this. What you're seeing right there, the red line, is the signal we get from the grid. And what we're really being told is whether there's oversupply or undersupply of electricity on the grid. And that green line you see at the 0 line is our response, Enbala's response back to the grid. And this is a signal we're receiving over a 6-hour period, And so if we were to add one asset on, and this is a 1 megawatt asset, you see our green line. It looks very kind of on-off, if you will. It's not really providing the response we need back to the grid. But what you need to consider is more of this network effect, this aggregation aspect of loads coming on to the power system that we've networked all together. So what's happening here is you're seeing many different other colors now come on the slide here, and the different lines, or the different color lines, if you will, represent different processes, and you can see that on the right-hand side. So we have some pumps, and then we're going to add, they're mostly pumps actually, but then you have an aeration, a boiler, etc. But what you're seeing here is the fact that through loads with different load profiles moving at different times, we're able to provide or emulate what the grid needs. And so what you're seeing here is the fact that our green line is tightly matched to what the signal of what the grid is requiring. And so again, it's this network effect. It's why you need many different organizations participating in this. There's not one organization that can provide grid balance back to the grid. It's very much a network process, and that's what Enbala does. We are ones that can help aggregate and figure out how much flexibility is required, and then decide what organizations are able to provide this balance or flexibility at any given point in time. So I want to talk to you a little bit about a case study we did, and this was with Confederation freezers. And so this was a 20 million cubic feet operation, operates 24 hours a day, and has state-of-the-art refrigeration systems. And what that means is really high peak demand, high annual electricity costs, and engaged in leading-edge energy initiatives. And so they were really looking for various things that they can do to help minimize their electricity costs. Cold storage facilities are big users of electricity, especially in the summer, because they have to keep their inventory as cold as possible. So what we did for an implementation is what we first do is go out to site and basically do an audit to figure out what flexibility is available. And so we identify the processes and figure out what would be low-hanging fruit for us to be able to utilize for this program. And then we figure out what the operational priorities and constraints are. And so that means for a cold storage facility, what would their temperature band be for their cold storage or frozen foods? So this would mean, a temperature band between -16 and -12, let's say. And so that would be the constraint in which we can move the needle, so to speak, between if they would have maybe an average of -14, and they can go down to -16 or up to -12. And so that is really what we figure out is what are the operational priorities and constraints for which Enbala can work with and monetize in order to provide this service back to the grid. Once we figure this all out, we then put in an energy monitor, a local communication panel, a little small computer within the facility that provides real-time access to exactly what's happening at this facility. We also put as well revenue grade meters in, and please keep in mind the equipment that we put in at the facility is at Enbala's cost. So any work that needs to be done for this program, it is on Enbala. So we pay for everything. This does not cost you money in order for you to participate, and that even means from the equipment perspective. And then from there, once the equipment's in there, we obviously run several tests, and then we do a pilot where in which we see how this performs, how your facility performs, so you can get comfortable with how this works. And then once we both decide that we're in agreement, that we're happy with the way things have gone on in the pilot, we then agree to put you and bid you into market, and then that's when you would start receiving revenue checks. So a couple things to think about here is the fact that there are no penalties to participate. You participate the hours you're able to, and that for the equipment that's put in there, it is at Enbala's cost and not yours. So really the cost is maybe your time, this hour we're spending right now, for you to participate in this call. That would be your internal cost. But other than that, all the work is done and paid for by Enbala. So the results of this pilot was the fact that it was a cost-free program. It was a successful demonstration period. No impact to the facility's operations. We stayed within the parameters of the plant, and it was transparent to daily operations. And that is key. We always want to hear that from our client. If we hear from our customers, we don't know that you're here doing this, then we know we've succeeded. And that is the unique thing. This is why facilities like hospitals, universities, facilities that normally can't shut down necessarily to do demand response events, they like our program because it's very behind the scenes. It's the fact that this is happening and you don't even know it's ongoing. And other things to think about is that security is key to what we do. For us to be able to work with the grid, we have to have the highest security. For us to be able to work with municipal water and waste, you know, those type of facilities, especially in the U.S., we have to have the highest security as well. So, you know, that is what our platform is based on and built on. So we want to make sure that, you know, all our organizations are comfortable with what is happening. I guess the last point is the fact that, and I said this earlier, is that your energy consumption and cost remain neutral. This cannot cost you more on a monthly basis from an electricity perspective. This cannot impact how your inventory, whether you're creating widgets or you're freezing food. We cannot compromise your operational process for you to participate in our program. Quite frankly, if we did, you would never participate. So that is like, that is very important for us to ensure that that never happens. And you know, this case study on Confederation freezers will be released by the Ontario Power Authority in the coming weeks, and so in which you can learn more about the case and how it worked at this facility. So, you know, just a couple of things what customers are saying. This is a quote from the president of American Water, Pennsylvania. And the fact is they're always looking for ways to increase the cost effectiveness of their operations. And what they liked about Enbala was the fact that we didn't compromise the high level of quality and that they expected. And so they are monetizing their processes without impacting the operations. And again, that is success for us. Again, they're performing their operations and they don't know that it's even happening. And this next quote is really says that. The great thing about Enbala is with the system turned on and lowering our net cost of energy, we don't even know it's there. It's invisible to our operations. And again, this is all done behind the scenes, completely automated. And again, we're just essentially, the way in which you run your processes today, we would be doing the same thing tomorrow. We're really just monetizing those processes. So just a couple things about where we're active. Obviously, we're speaking with you in Ontario. We have facilities up and running today. We're getting ready to bid them at the start of 2013, and that's the IESO market. That's the Ontario market, the bright green in the map there. We're also involved, bottom right-hand corner, we're bidding into market. We've been active there for a year now in Pennsylvania, Jersey, and Maryland, and so that's the bottom blue. A couple other, I guess, success stories is what we're doing on the East Coast. We're involved in what they call power shift, and that's where in which we're using demand-side loads to react to the intermittency of wind. And so on the East Coast, Canada, New Brunswick, they rely significantly on wind, and we help backfill that intermittency using demand-side loads. So just to summarize here, we're creating a new untapped revenue stream. There's zero cost to clients for setup. There's no change to operational processes as I've outlined. There's no change to your energy consumption, and it's quite innovative. There's not many, no one else is currently offering this, especially using demand-side loads, and we know this for a fact in the Ontario market.
So thank you,
Okay.
Greg.
We're having technical difficulties.
Yes,
One
I feel
second.
as soon as I think the slide has frozen, but I can quickly just switch to. But we do have a couple of questions, and for those people who are have any questions, can type them in the chat section right now. And I'll just go. So there we go, right? Do you see that right now? That's the summary. So our first question was, so if someone's already intended to engage in the DR3, so that's demand response consultation program, distributed power production based upon a chip plant, etc., would we should still talk to you and see what else could be suggested?
Sorry, what was the last part there?
So I guess I think someone was looking into going into DR3. Is
Right.
there an opportunity to also work with you as well if they're being part of the demand response program?
So if the question is they're looking at participating in demand responses DR3, could they participate in the Enbala program as well?
Yes.
Yeah, so absolutely. And, you know, we have many organizations doing that, whether it be in demand response or curtailment programs or participating in global adjustment or various other energy initiatives. We are just one of the others platforms out there or programs that they can participate in. And so when you're doing demand response, you wouldn't be participating in our program. As I said earlier, our program's 8,760 hours. And so there's many hours within the year you can participate. You know, demand response, for example, really only runs in the summertime. You may have an event in the winter, but there's many other hours, whether it be the fall or spring, where in which you would be able to engage and participate in our program and receive a revenue stream. So that is a unique benefit, is the fact that our program is every hour on the hour all year long.
Okay. And what is the utility's internal rate of return on this program?
So that's a great question. So in terms of payment, you know, and it's approximate, but we pay customers approximately $65,000 per megawatt of range per year. And so when we say megawatt of range, so that's $65,000 for you having the ability to move up your load by 500 kilowatts or down 500 kilowatts. Obviously, if we can only move up half that amount, we pay you or prorate that. But we would pay a customer the ability to move their load up and down by 500 kilowatts, $65,000 per year.
Okay. And so one participant has air compressors as their major load. Do you have case studies for this type of load?
We've worked with their compressors. I'm not aware if we have an actual case study on it, but we've looked at them in the past. We would actually have to identify, because not all air compressors are a fit, so we would have to actually take a look at that. So it is really on a case-by-case basis based on the way in which your facility uses the air compressors. But that is something obviously we would take a look at.
Okay. And how many participants should enroll in the program to meet the load requirement? For example, what would be the ratio of participants? What would it look like for 1 megawatt demand on your end?
Well, I mean, so are you asking how many customers would we need to be able to provide 1 megawatt of grid balance back to the grid?
Yes, yeah.
I mean, that all is different. I mean, that all is different. I mean, you know, you could have one organization that could provide a megawatt on their own potentially. Most average customers can usually provide 500 kilowatts to a megawatt of load, and so on average, the price they'd be receiving potentially could be $40,000 for half a megawatt. But it really does all depend on terms of you know, how much flexibility that facility has. But you know, 1 megawatt could easily be done by one facility.
Okay. And just to go back to the internal rate of return for the utility, I guess I asked the question incorrectly. It's based on the utility, not for the client. So it would be the internal rate of return for utility, not the client.
So and maybe I could be misunderstanding it. So because we're dealing with the ISO, they're paying, so the ISO or the grid manager are paying us to provide this service back to the grid. It's just like how they would pay Ontario Power Generation to generate or provide electricity. We're paid to provide this service, a certain number of megawatts to provide this back to the grid, and then we pay the customer. So I'm not really understanding the initial rate of return. If the customer wants to understand what's the return on investment, the payback's quite quickly, because if you're able to provide flexibility, you're receiving a quarterly revenue check. So it's quite instantaneous. If you have this inherent flexibility that we can harvest from you based on the way in which you run your process, we would then start cutting you a revenue check quarterly for that participation.
Okay, and what creates the revenue stream to the client?
So the stream is the ISO pays Enbala, and then we pay that client directly for their participation.
Okay, and what is the entry point for Enbala energy monitored equipment to be hooked into the end user's power distribution network? And does it run in parallel or in series with the load?
So it pretty much runs behind the scenes. So in series, essentially, we're not connected to the load directly, so the process, we're not directly connected to, let's say, a pump or a chilling system, to the air compressors. What we're connected to is the actual building automation system or the SCADA system. So your control system, we're connected directly to that. So all the communication from where we receive the signal from the grid manager, and that goes through our platform, and then our platform's communicating with our local communication panel, which is a mini computer that sits on the facility. And this mini computer basically hooks into the control system at the site. And again, we're just monitoring to see if this building automation system or control system has this flexibility and has that ability to participate at that given point in time. So again, we are running behind the scenes, running within your building automation system, and it's your building automation system or SCADA system or control system that's making the decisions on whether or not your process, your equipment has the ability to change the way in which it uses power.
Okay, so this is one of our last questions, so if anyone else has a few questions, maybe just type them in. Do customers find energy opportunities during the review study period?
Sorry, can you just ask that once more?
So during, I guess, a review study period, this is the same gentleman who asked about the air compressor load. Mm-hmm. So would there be a revenue seen for them if it was like a test run?
Oh, I see. No, normally, so the way in which it works is that we would come to site and basically do an audit to determine what the financial opportunity is. Mm-hmm. And so that really takes us an hour, really. I mean, we do a lot of the analysis back at our office here. And based on what we determine, if there's a financial opportunity, we then give you a proposal. And basically the proposal will determine and tell you exactly what you would be making on an annual basis, but also what we would be doing. So based on the processes that we looked at during the site visit, we would then, in the proposal, tell you how we would work with them. But then we would, if you were in agreement with it, how this would work, how the revenue potential, and how the equipment would participate in this program, we would then do this pilot. We don't pay you for the pilot because we believe that the pilot is really just to set you up and ensure that everyone is comfortable with the program and making sure that we're working within the guidelines of the way in which your facility operates, so that you can then start participating in the commercial program, and that's when you would get paid. So you are only looking, though, at maybe within 3 months from start to finish that you could participate and start getting paid. So there's not a lot of work on your end, to be honest, to participate in this program. A lot of the heavy lifting and the work is really done on our side. So whether it be from the amount of time you need required to the equipment, there's very little for you to do. Again, we pay for the equipment, and it's our engineers that do all the analysis of how this would work. And even if you outsource your controls engineering work that needs to be done, we would help pay for that as well. So we feel that that we're offering enough in order to get you going into the commercial market.
Okay, and then so another interesting question too. So does a company need to have a building automation system, or does another system kind of work with yours?
So that's a great question. So it does not necessarily need to have a building automation system. It has to have some central control. However, if the load is big enough, if the process is big enough, we could work directly with it. So again, for that person that's asking that question, we would be happy to take a look at the facility to see how it's set up. It's not a one-size-fits-all. Every facility is completely different. Even if you go to one large conglomerate, all their facilities are all different. So we never see the same setup anywhere. So there is automation that is required, but that can take many different forms. So you don't necessarily need this, what we call a SCADA or building automation system.
Okay, those are, I believe, there are all the questions we have. I'm just going to thank everyone joining us this afternoon. On behalf of our partners, Green Greater Toronto, Better Buildings Partnership, and the Canada Green Building Council, Greater Toronto chapter, including our utilities, Hydro Brenta 1, Enbridge, EnerSource, and Toronto Hydro. We thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Are there any final questions or comments, Greg, from you?
No, again, I just want to thank for everyone participating and giving their time to hear what Enbala does, and we look forward to hopefully hearing from you or following up with you to see what potential there is for your participation.
Great, thank you. And I just want to follow up as well with one question about the internal rate of return, but I guess we can direct that offline as well. I'll send you the question, Greg.
Excellent, that would be helpful.
Great, thank you. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone, and check in for our next webinar. It'll be coming out soon.
Great, thanks, Alexander.
Thank you, Greg.